So this is going to be a talk about our experiences at Boston University of deploying secure multi-party computation. This is based on joint work with a bunch of folks at BU and other institutions, people with backgrounds in programming languages and networking and usability, human factors design, and systems, and so on. And you'll see why all of those backgrounds are useful in this project. Hang on a second. Okay. So some caveats up front for this talk. Maybe it's a good talk for the morning. It's not there's no scientific technical details about how MPC works here. But just for a one-sentence reminder, MPC is about allowing you to compute things as if you had the ability to hand over all your data to a trusted party who would do the work for you, but without actually having this this magical trusted party. But it somehow, through cryptography, allows you to compute things in a secure, while protecting the privacy of your inputs. Other than that sentence, I'm not going to say anything more about how MPC works. In terms of everything that I'm going to describe, it's very simple from the perspective of MPC. It's mostly additive secret sharing, semi-honest, secure MPC, so known since the 1980s. And performance for the talk is not actually going to be much of a concern. Instead, I'm going to talk about sort of our experiences in deploying MPC in a situation which we think helps for social good, and focus on sort of all of the challenges involved in sort of describing MPC to the people involved, making sure we collect data appropriately, and sort of some of the systems design challenges involved. And I'll caution, although I'll sort of try to draw, hopefully generic reusable lessons from our experience and point those out when I get to them, I caution all these lessons up front by saying this is just one application that we have been able to deploy 3 times, and maybe the lessons that we learned will not be useful to any sort of application. But sort of this is just our lessons of how to overcome the barriers of getting MPC out to the people. So just like any talk, I'll begin with an assumption, but since I said this is not going to be a cryptographic talk, it's not going to be a cryptographic assumption. I'm going to start with sort of a social assumption, which is that pay equity, i.e. Men and women being paid equal pay for equal work, is a desirable goal. If you do not agree with this assumption, maybe keep that to yourself. I'm going to assume for now that everyone in this talk is going to agree. So this is the social problem that we are going to try to somehow use MPC as like one small piece of trying to understand and address. So what is the context for this talk? It's an initiative that was begun by the former mayor of Boston, Mayor Menino, and he created this organization in 2013 called the Boston Women's Workforce Council, which is a consortium of a bunch of people throughout the city of Boston, a lot of people who are like political experienced people, like the former lieutenant governor, first female lieutenant governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, as an example, and many other very successful women in business and politics and so on. And this consortium to set up to try to understand and improve the situation of pay equity, or to reduce the disparity in pay between men and women throughout the city of Boston. And this organization went out and collected and spoke with the executives, CEO level executives of many different companies throughout the city, and got them to agree to sign on to this compact, this 100% talent compact. Which basically says that we, the companies who sign on to this compact, pledge to do our part to make pay equity a reality within the city, and to participate within the Boston Women's Workforce Council's programs. They have a bunch of programs that they offer, many of which I'm not remotely qualified to discuss, but sort of things about trying to provide sessions to HR employees of these companies to try to help them identify like what are some pitfalls or things to avoid when making hiring or promotion decisions, how to make sure there's not any explicit or implicit bias in these, offering sessions to employees, like to women, to give them training about how to negotiate for a salary that is properly reflective of their worth to the company, et cetera, et cetera. Like I said, this is all very good stuff that I personally don't know much about. Why am I here? Because they had one very innovative idea within, well, they have lots, but one quantitative innovative alternative idea, which is to actually measure for all the companies in the city of Boston what is the actual pay disparity. Okay, so it's sort of following the mantra of what gets measured gets done. In order to sort of understand the issue, the employers who signed on to this 100% talent compact agreed to participate in a review. It says biennial, but actually they've done it every year for the past 3 years, to discuss successes and challenges, as well as contribute data to a report compiled by a third party on the compact's success to date. So the idea is all of the companies provide the salary data of their employees to some trusted third party who would then take that information, compute just the average pay disparity between men and women across the city, and delete the original source data about all the employers' salary information. That was the initial idea anyway, and so then they went on to go do that, find a party who would be willing to hang on to this data. They spoke specifically with the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and unfortunately this kind of didn't go anywhere. Well, unfortunately for this original idea, this didn't really go anywhere. Employers were not willing to hand over sensitive salary information about their employees to a third party. And a third party was not interested, this third party, the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, once the Harvard lawyers heard about this, they were not interested in acquiring all of this information because, for instance, if they have a data breach and they lose the salary information, now you have 100 companies and their employees all suing you all at the same time. This is a massive liability that the Harvard lawyers had no interest in taking on. So this idea of compiled by a trusted third party failed. Right around this time, just sort of serendipity, Professor Azar Bistavros from BU happened to be having a meeting with the former mayor of Boston, Mayor Menino, about some other projects that we had going on, like at Boston University, things that were just kicking off about sort of an initiative on smart city development to sort of use some work within our computer science department to connect with the city of Boston, et cetera. Anyway, this just happened. It was not scheduled to be a meeting about this topic, but since the mayor was speaking with Azar, he said, hey, I have this problem. I have all of these companies whose CEOs have agreed to sign on to this compact to collect wage equity data, but I don't have any way to actually do this collection. And Azar said, oh, I know exactly what to do. Secure multi-party computation is what you need here. So this is sort of, the genesis of us working with the city and with the Boston Women's Workforce Council to use MPC to help them with the actual wage collection process. So the lesson I sort of like to take away, only half joking, is if you want to find a good application of MPC, find somebody who has overpromised and cannot somehow deliver on the promises that they have made. Okay, so now that we have the city on board with this idea of MPC, there's just the small matter of explaining what on earth MPC is to all of the companies who have signed on to a compact to contribute their data into this mythical process. So from the company's point of view, they have sort of from the top down, their CEOs have signed on to this document agreeing to contribute their data. And then when the HR employees and the lawyers in all of these companies heard about it, this is when the problems arose with the original plan of the trusted third party. They didn't like it, but remember, they still also have to do what their they also have to try to do what their CEOs have signed on to. So they have an interest in learning about what this alternative approach is, but they don't know anything about it yet. So this was sort of a 2-year-ish process, 1.5-ish year process involving Azar Bistavros and others at BU, to explain what on earth MPC is to the executives at companies, HR employees, and the lawyers. And I put here this picture just because this is the actual picture that we used during that time to describe it, to show sort of 2 out of 2 secret sharing of data in order to compute the summation, the sum of 2 contributors' information. I'm not going to go through walk through the diagram here because I think you can sort of see where this is going. But just sort of here's the picture that we used and sort of talked with people at length about how exactly this process works. I'll come back to that. So actually, here's a picture of Azar holding the exact piece of paper that was the last slide that I had in my talk, and at a meeting of all of the HR executives in sort of, I think, mid-2014, if I remember correctly, to sort of walk through this process. It was a lot of discussion with a lot of different companies involved here. Initially, the 100% Talent Compact had about, I think, 70 signatories by 2014-2015 timeframe. it's now up to more than 200 companies throughout the city who have signed on. So a lot of companies asked questions about MPC, but they asked sort of different kinds of questions, right? So there's a variety of different companies represented here with a variety of different skills and sophistication in sort of math and science backgrounds. And so some of the more scientifically and mathematically inclined companies asked us a bunch of questions, such as, the finance folks, like State Street there is on the top line as a finance company, or technology companies like Raytheon, BBN. But then there are other companies who are, more retail companies who are not actually, they don't have too many people there who are as scientifically inclined, like, I don't know, Staples or BJ's or whatnot. They do really cool stuff, but sort of math is not within their core skill set, or it's not part of what their company does natively. So, what I'm trying to say is we didn't have to convince 70 companies about how MPC works. Turned out we basically had to convince 5 or 10 or 15. And the others were basically saying, well, if these folks, who have the personnel to understand it, seem okay with contributing their sensitive salary data, then I think our company is probably okay as well. So we ended up, identifying a few key participants who would sort of bring the others along, because, we are just the people who are trying to show the software, but they are all sort of in the same boat. They all have an equal interest in protecting their own input data. So, if we can convince some of them, then the rest sort of follow. Sort of going back to my last piece, another thing about this slide is that, so we show 2 out of 2 secret sharing between 2 participants, one that is a server at Boston University and another that is an analyst at the Boston Women's Workforce Council. The intent of this system is that only the Boston Women's Workforce Council is the party that receives the output. And it's a 2 out of 2 secret sharing scheme, so it is the case that, if at least one of the 2 parties chooses to, is honest and does not share, does not, deviate from the protocol at all, then everything is fine. So basically, you can choose whether you wish to trust either Boston University or the Boston Women's Workforce Council. But we didn't actually describe it that way because we knew that everybody would trust the Boston Women's Workforce Council, right? Those are the folks who came to them to sign them on to the 100% Talent Compact. We're just a bunch of mathematicians and computer scientists who they had never really met before. So everyone was going to trust the Boston Women's Workforce Council. So we simply presented it to them as, the system allows you not to have to trust BU, right? That you only have to trust the Boston Women's Workforce Council, which is a strictly weaker statement than, this sort of 1 out of 2 either way security. But since we already understood sort of the way that the contributors were likely to lean, we sort of tried to sort of inherently contextualize the trust requirements of MPC to what we figured they would already be interested in. So it sort of resonated with them that okay, BU is providing this service, but we don't have to trust BU. Okay, so that was sort of a quick summary of a multi-year effort to describe MPC to them. The next thing was to develop a system for them to enter their data. We built a website that, if I have some time at the end, I can show you the current iteration of. But it's basically, it just uses a spreadsheet interface, in part because HR employees love spreadsheets. So it's a familiar interface to them. It's also, sort of the reason we used sort of a JavaScript application is because it's the one thing that we figured that all of these companies would have access to. Everyone has access to a web browser, but if I build a custom native application and I ask 100 different companies to install it, then I have to fight with 100 different IT staff members who have their own sort of rules as to what kinds of software can and cannot be installed on their corporate networks. So web browsers have won what I call the corporate environment compatibility wars, and so we sort of just went with that. The other thing about this spreadsheet is it's modeled off of an existing form that any employer with more than 50 employees has to submit annually a form to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, this EEO1 form that sort of shows the demographics of how their workforce is comprised. So the lesson that I learned here is sort of, while all companies have their own internal systems for managing and dealing dealing with salary information, their own sophisticated HR systems, very complicated things that I would never know what to do if I had access to it, and no one would ever give me access to it in the first place. The fact that there is this government regulation means that they actually already have to export sort of this data in a standardized mechanism. That was really useful to us, so that we didn't have to sort of fight between like do some sort of schema normalization between different companies' inputs, that we could all actually ask them to input it in a standardized format. Actually, maybe I'll just show, like, here's the current version of the website. It's 100talent.org. You're welcome to go to it yourself. So this is the website. This is a more up-to-date than the picture, which was 2 years old. This is the current version of the site. The beginning just asks for some information about sort of which session you're contributing to. So at the beginning of a particular data collection session, everyone is told a particular key for that session. Whoops, this is kind of big. Here we go. So yeah, and so like here's sort of the information that they fill in. All of this information is literally what it asks for on the EEO1 form. So it sort of asks you, how many people do you have at each kind of level of employment? There are standardized categories that the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission sets, and that companies are sort of free to interpolate sort of where their employees fit into these categories as they see fit. So across types of categories of labor, across gender and ethnicity. So this first thing is literally the EEO1 form, but then we go further than just asking the number of employees. We also ask how much money they make so that we can compute the actual pay disparity. This is not part of the original EEO1 form, but it was actually not too difficult for employers to acquire this information. Basically, it took on average sort of one employee for 5 or 6 hours, almost one business day, for them to use their own internal HR software and collect this kind of information. Yes, question?
So what function is your MPC operating?
Just the global sum of all these.
So like per cell sum?
Mm-hmm. Yes, per cell, yeah. Yes. So basically the idea is to be able to acquire data about pay equity so that you can understand sort of what the causes or what are the most prevalent reasons for pay disparity between men and women. The reason for breaking this down is to ask questions like, are there pay disparity at sort of entry-level positions that men and women are hired at different salary levels, or are they promoted? When they're promoted, do they get different salary levels as they go through the promotion chain, or do they have equal salary levels at each level of promotion, but they're promoted at different rates, right? If you just see so just to be clear, using my standard assumption from the beginning, all three of these things are bad, but they are different bad. And so if you want to try to move towards a world with equal pay for equal work, then you have to understand what are the sources of pay disparity, what are the more systemic sources throughout the city rather than just individualized to a particular employer, and so that you can figure out sort of what are the right strategies that should be pursued within hiring managers and other kinds of employees within the company to try to address the gaps that exist. So each of these cells is per cell secret shared locally using client-side JavaScript and sent to the two different participants, the Boston Women's Workforce Council and BU, and then they're aggregated, and then just the aggregates are revealed to the Boston Women's Workforce Council. So there's total compensation information. They decided in the 2017 iteration to add a question about bonuses so that you could see if the issue is caused not just by base salaries being the same or different, but by bonuses. This matters a lot more in industries where bonuses make a substantial fraction of salaries, such as finance, for example. And total length of service, again, getting to the question of sort of entry level versus sort of where pay disparity exists. Okay, so anyway, so that's the website. Whoops, hang on, sorry. Cool. The other thing I'll say is, the original application that we built, it just does additive secret sharing, semi-honest security. There's no, there's no zero knowledge proofs or some other thing for malicious security. There's no differential privacy. Maybe there should be, and maybe we're hoping to add some of these features in the future. But it was actually really important to us that for the first iteration of this site, it was a really simple, clean code base. Okay, so the JavaScript that we built, this client-side JavaScript, it was 300 some odd lines of code at the beginning, and this simplicity was important because there were companies who really just just wanted to, to look at the code and analyze it themselves, send it to their own, computer scientists and computer security folks. And if we had sent them, a 10,000 line code base, well, first of all, the chance of us actually having bugs in that software is definitely greater. And second of all, and they know this just as well as we do. And even if there were no actual bugs somehow miraculously, that we wrote something, as a bunch of academics that first time had no bugs, then it would still be hard for anybody to verify that property. So the simplicity was really important. In a sense, they were more concerned about bugs in the code than with things like, oh, but you only provide semi-honest security, et cetera. Okay. Another thing that was important, not from the contributor standpoint, but from the Boston Women's Workforce Council's website standpoint, is that we built the system so that even they did not have to stand up a web server. So most of the analysts at the BWWC and some of the other parties we've talked to since then, none of them really have the technical sophistication themselves internally in-house to set up a web server. So this sort of ruled out all of the existing standard open source systems for MPC, VIF, ShareMind, Speeds, et cetera, which at least out of the box require all computing parties to stand up web servers. That was not really an option for us. And in a sense, when we talk to people who are analysts about potentially using MPC, they like the fact that we can sort of be their sort of outsourced IT services for them, so that they don't have to worry about any of these kinds of things. Even if they were willing to collect the data in the clear, the fact of the matter is they can't even stand up these services. So this MPC allows us to stand up web services on their behalf without enduring the burden of the encumbrance of having their data. So anyway, the lesson we have here is sort of exploit asymmetry and sort of specialization of labor, what everybody is good at. So finally, once we built the interface, we had to explain to users how to use it to make sure, to minimize the chance of data entry errors, which is like one of the things we were most concerned about, because with MPC, if someone submitted spurious data, we would never really know, and it would ruin our averages. So we have like training sessions and videos. Here's a screenshot of a YouTube video that we have online. We did a dry run with synthetic data that we provided them, so a month before the actual test, the actual data collection, we gave them some fake data so that if they have any questions or problems when entering it, they can call us up and they can actually tell us what they're doing. They can say, oh, I tried to enter the cell 100 and whatever, and there was a problem, because we don't want them to actually talk in the real data collection about their real data, because the whole point is we don't want to know anything about their real data. But with synthetic data, they could talk to us. We also have in our client-side JavaScript a bunch of error messages if you do something strange. So here's a picture of me like typing in, I have 100,000 employees at a particular cell. And the thing says there's a sort of a warning message like that sounds wrong. Basically what we were worried about is people transposing the number of employees with the salary information. So rather than saying I have one employee who makes $100,000, I say I have 100,000 employees who make $1. And that's totally going to throw off our averages. So we have a bunch of client-side warnings to try to make sure that that doesn't occur. So our data collection, the first iteration of it was in 2015, specifically on June 8th. That's a Monday. I mentioned this, we sort of affectionately call this D-Day for Data Collection Day. But 2 days before this, on a Saturday, like on legit actual D-Day, we get this, one of the contributors who was going to participate in this compact sent us a letter saying, like, basically, we will not participate in the system unless you sign a non-disclosure agreement. Right? So on a Saturday morning, Professor Azar Bistavros has to call the president of Boston University, who calls the chief of the BU legal team and says, like, can we sign this thing? Right? And so Azar describes to these two folks on a Saturday morning like what MPC is, and is able to sort of convince them that yes, it's actually safe for BU to sign this form, because the whole point of MPC is that we're not learning anything interesting. We just have secret shares of information. I think this is pretty cool because it's the one thing that sort of stymied the original trusted third party, right? That because they were collecting the raw data in the clear, their own lawyers were not willing to allow them to do that, even if the contributors were somehow fine with it. Whereas here, we were able to sign this. So anyway, so the lesson I learned here is, even if you build a technology whose whole goal is to assuage the lawyers, like they will get the last laugh eventually. So, okay. So then this data collection went fine. For the most part, there's always the human element to be concerned about. We had a hotline open on the day of the collection in case people had questions about the software. So there are certain people who had all sorts of levels of difficulty with the data entry. One of them on the phone line was basically like, if this doesn't work, can I just fax you my data? So we were like, no, please don't do this. We just signed this non-disclosure agreement, and we don't want it to actually have to mean anything. So we really don't want to have your data. So anyway, so a potential weak point of, this is something you all already know, but a potential weak point of security solutions is always the sort of the human element, and there's nothing that you can or even want to remove that, but it's things that you have to be cognizant of when you're building systems to mitigate. So that's where I talked about things like the client-side data entry stuff. Sort of based on that lesson learned from the first year, then we went and talked to actual experts in human factors design to learn how to design the interface further, rather than just these like ad hoc client-side checks, how to build a system that minimizes the chance of user error. So that sort of led to the design of this newer website, which looks fancier than the original picture. Actually, I showed you all of these spreadsheet, like all these entries, but we encourage people now not to actually type in this information because they can get it wrong. We actually send them an Excel spreadsheet months ahead of time so that they have plenty of time to work within their own internal teams on sort of getting the right data. And it has this drag and drop interface that you can just drop in the Excel spreadsheet and it will auto-populate everything and you just check that it works correctly. And we have a bunch of checks. If you make mistakes right before you submit the data, it will throw up a bunch of errors. So if I try to do this, I didn't write what my session number participation code is, but I also I've made all sorts of mistakes. First of all, I haven't filled out most of the table, and so everything is red here because I haven't done anything. So we want to make sure people explicitly write 0 if they mean 0, so that they're making positive conscious intention things rather than sort of making negative inferences from things that they haven't done, et cetera. So anyway, learn from our mistake. When you're designing a system, for privacy-preserving data collection, actually talk with human factors people from the start. So I'll just say briefly, sort of, so we've run this now 3 times. So I mentioned the 2015 collection in detail. I'll briefly say for 2016 and 17, we have more signatories. Over 150 signatories by the 2016 collection, and over 200 signatories by the 2017 collection. The 2016 version of it has since been, the data has been published on the City of Boston's website. That's the title page of the PDF file that you can download from their website. The data encompasses salary information from about 112,000 employees in the greater Boston area. It's about 10% of the workforce. Collectively, that represents about $11 billion in wages. It was a lot easier to sort of the marginal, so even though our collection was like the number of participants who signed on to the compact grew from over the years, the process of sort of educating them was a lot easier in years 2 and 3, in part because we knew what we were doing and we had more effective sort of training processes, again, more like video training and on-site training and things like this, but also because, again, like what I said earlier about sort of the first mover issues, there are a certain core group of people, and the new signatories to the compact were more okay with contributing their data because they figured that whoever was in the first set of folks, if something was substantially wrong with what we were saying, they never would have agreed to it. So sort of people start to build up trust in this system, even ironically if it's designed explicitly so that they don't have to trust us in the first place. Right, let me sort of, I'll just quickly say like one of the reactions. So this is Congresswoman Catherine Clark of the 5th District of Massachusetts. And she happens to be both individually a proponent of the National Science Foundation and basic funding for the sciences, and also largely interested in the issue of pay equity. And this was a neat project for her because it showed how to combine her 2 what she thought were independent interests. Let me just sort of skip I think I'm running out of time, so I'll stop there and take questions. And also, you can find all of our papers and code, et cetera, on our website. Thanks.
All right, so we've got time for question 2. Questions for Mayank? Yes, Henry.
So what did the data look like in the end? What were the outcomes of this?
So I don't actually know because I don't. I like the whole point of the system is that we never saw the raw data outputs, right? But you can read the reports from the City of Boston website from the 2016 data collection. They show information about the actual women on average in the city are paid X% for $1 that men are paid, this kind of thing. I don't remember the exact value of this X. I think it was like 79% or something like this. But don't quote me on this. You should look at the report. It's actually a very well-written report, so I'd recommend it.
Chris?
It's interesting that the trust issue here, I mean, thinking of it from the point of the lawyers asking you to sign that NDA, how are they certain that all the code that some of these companies have gone in and vetted is actually what's being served to them when the JavaScript
Yeah,
comes
good
across?
questions.
So there are issues where they still do have to trust you.
That's true. So we did. So we open sourced our JavaScript on GitHub a couple months before the actual thing, so that companies had time to vet. We told them that they're more than welcome to compare that code with the actual thing that they're served on the day of when they actually go to the site. But that's a manual process. That's something that actually should be easier to do, and we're trying to think about how to make that actually more of an automated process. But there are companies who had different levels of technical sophistication. There are those who said, we're going to run your JavaScript code through a static analysis checker tool. I don't know if there actually is static analysis checking for JavaScript. I've never heard of it. But there are companies who said that they were going to rigorously vet our code, and maybe just the fact that we weren't scared off by that statement made them happy. I don't know. But we did our best to try to sort of make it available to them early and allow them to compare, but I wouldn't be surprised if no one actually did that comparison.
I have a question. So what do you think are you guys found this sort of one case study, this one use case where it really made sense and you pulled it off, and which is great. Going forward, where do you see the next places where these ideas could easily be adopted?
That's a good question. So I don't know exactly a place, but just sort of finding individuals and also companies who have an interest in information that they want to acquire but cannot for sort of either legal issues or for corporate responsibility type issues that they don't like. There's information that they want to benefit the public good, but they don't want to be in the business of collecting too much. So I'll give an example of one company we're talking with is the Honda Research Institute. So Honda is a car company, obviously, and their brand is built on the idea of personal safety. Their view is that you can buy any car, but you buy a Honda because you and your family feel safe in it. And when we talk with the scientists who work there, they really like the idea of MPC because now that cars are having all of these digital sensors and collecting all this information, they view privacy as the digital extension of that safety question, right? So public safety in the digital space when you buy a Honda is about making sure that the data from these sensors are protected. So Honda would like to see if they can make this information about sensors about near miss accidents or whatever available to the city for city planners so that they can fix dangerous traffic lights, but without compromising individual privacy. And I think this view of privacy as the digital extension of personal safety is a really cool view. So anyway, I think companies or that sort of have some sort of legal or ethical or corporate interest in sort of in digital privacy, I think is my answer to your question.
Cool. All right, so let's thank Mayank again.